The scorching midday sun reflected off the chrome of luxury cars perfectly lined up in front of the Red Bluff Exhibition Center. Photographers and influencers jostled to capture the arrival of American canine royalty. However, all eyes converged on a single point: the sumptuous black SUV from which Merrick Alton, 24, heir to the Alton oil empire, disembarked with his impeccable golden Labrador, Valor. Valor wasn't just a dog, he was an institution, a symbol, an empire unto himself. His paws walked red carpets with the same naturalness as Merrick's fingers slid across his keyboard to post photos that accumulated millions of likes. To his followers, they were the embodiment of perfection. The young man with the defined jawline, designer clothes, and the gleaming coated dog that seemed to have stepped out of an Instagram filter. "Brilliant as always, Mr. Alton," shouted a photographer, as Merrick adjusted his sunglasses and smiled with that smile that had cost a small city's annual budget in dental treatments. "Is Valor ready for another trophy?" asked a reporter, shoving a microphone almost into the animal's muzzle, which maintained the composure worthy of a canine diplomat. "Let's just say the other competitors might as well save gas money on their trip home," Merrick replied, with the charming arrogance his public relations team had carefully cultivated. What no one saw beyond the cameras were Valor's eyes, slightly clouded, with a feverish gleam that any experienced veterinarian would recognize as pain. Nobody noticed the slight trembling of his right front paw when he put weight on it. Nobody, except Dr. Elias Monroe, the veterinarian from Silver Pine Estate, who observed the scene from a distance, a knot of guilt tightening his throat. "Apply another dose before the presentation," whispered Merrick as he bent to pet Valor, discreetly passing a note to the nearest assistant. "We can't risk it. The investors are here." Backstage, away from the main lights, glamour, Nico Bright, a 12-year-old boy with worn sneakers and an antiquated camera hanging around his neck, observed everything with attentive, dreamy eyes. His parents had been handlers at Silver Pine Estate for years, until they were replaced by automated systems and temporary staff. Now they struggled to survive with minor jobs in the small community of Red Bluff. "One day I'll have a dog like Valor," Nico murmured to himself, pressing the camera against his chest. It wasn't just childish admiration. It was a dream that kept him awake at night, studying books on training and animal care. Valor had been his inspiration since the first viral video he'd watched, where the Labrador performed impressive tricks with almost supernatural grace. The boy had saved for months to buy the ticket to the event, money from small jobs delivering newspapers, mowing lawns, anything he could do. It wasn't just a dog show for him, it was a university, a chance to observe the best and learn. When the lights dimmed and the announcer announced the start of the competition, Nico squeezed between adults to get a good viewing angle. Across the arena, Merrick adjusted Valor's collar, his trembling fingers betraying the confidence his voice exuded. "This is our moment," he whispered to the dog. "Mom would be proud." It was a phrase no one else heard, a rare moment of vulnerability. Valor had been his mother's last gift before cancer took her. Each victory, each trophy, each applause was a desperate attempt to keep her memory alive, to prove his worth to his perpetually absent father, to justify his own existence beyond the fortune he'd inherited. What no one knew, not even his most devoted followers, was that behind the perfect photos existed a dangerous obsession, a need for perfection that was beginning to erode any sense of reality. For Merrick, failure was not an option. It never had been. When Valor's name was announced, the crowd erupted in applause. The Labrador entered the arena with studied steps, executing each movement with robotic precision. But something was different that day. With each step, an almost imperceptible shudder ran through his body. The fracture in his paw, disguised by potent painkillers, was beginning to show signs that not even the best medication could mask. Nico, with his meticulous observation, was perhaps the only one to notice. "Something's wrong," he murmured, frowning as he adjusted his camera's focus. When the moment came for the obstacle jump, Valor's specialty, time seemed to slow down. The Labrador took distance, his eyes fixed on the obstacle ahead. Merrick at the side held his breath. "Doctor." Monroe looked away, unable to watch, and Nico, not knowing what he was about to witness, pressed his camera button. The jump began with usual grace but ended with a stumble. Valor landed awkwardly, his right paw giving way under his weight. A murmur ran through the audience as the Labrador, champion of so many competitions, struggled to compose himself. "Get up!" Merrick hissed between his teeth, his smile frozen for the cameras, while his world began to crumble. The rest of the presentation was a slow-motion tragedy. Valor, pushing beyond his limits, made error after error. When the judge announced the scores, Merrick had already left the arena, dragging Valor by the collar with unnecessary force. Backstage, away from the crowd's gaze, the charm mask fell apart. "Do you have any idea how much you just cost me?" he vociferated, his eyes injected with a fury that frightened even his experienced team. "Years of training, investment, my reputation, all down the drain." Dr. Monroe tried to intervene. "Merrick, he's injured. We need x-rays, immediate rest." "Shut up," Merrick cut him off. "You said he was ready. You guaranteed the medications would work." The veterinarian turned pale. "I warned about the risks. There are limits to what any animal can endure, even with—" "Limits? I don't accept limits." Merrick smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take him to the car. I know exactly what to do with failures." And it was at that moment, while watching the team lead a staggering Valor to the back exit, that Nico felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. Without thinking twice, he followed, keeping his distance, his camera still on. The reddish dust of the Sonoran Flats swirled around the wheels of the luxury SUV that wound through increasingly narrow and abandoned roads. The air conditioning fought against the relentless 104-degree heat that transformed the landscape into an open-air furnace. In the back seat, Valor panted weakly, his half-closed eyes reflecting confusion and pain. "5 more minutes," announced the driver, casting nervous glances at Merrick through the rearview mirror. In the passenger seat, Merrick contemplated the desolate landscape with frightening calmness, as if the desert were a blank canvas for his purposes. The public defeat had shattered something fundamental within him, not just the wounded vanity of a socialite, but the last tangible connection to his mother. "Stop here," he ordered, when they reached a particularly isolated stretch where the cracked soil formed a mosaic of scars on the earth. The team of 3 men, well-paid employees of Silverpine Estate, exchanged apprehensive looks as Merrick exited the vehicle and opened the rear door. With mechanical movements, he pulled Valor out. The Labrador, sensing the change in atmosphere, instinctively resisted, his nails scratching the polished metal. "Bring the shovels," commanded Merrick, his voice devoid of emotion. Among the assistants, Jason, the youngest, hesitated. "Mr. Alton, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe with a few days of rest. Are you questioning my orders?" Merrick's voice cut through the hot air like an ice blade. "Or would you prefer to look for another job in an economy where your family couldn't even pay rent?" Jason lowered his eyes, swallowing hard. He was only 19, fresh out of high school, and this was his first real job. His mother depended on his salary for arthritis medication. Red Bluff was a town where opportunities were as rare as rain in the desert. "No, sir, sorry." The 3 men began to dig. The soil, despite being dried on the surface, soon revealed a viscous mud a few inches below, the result of an abandoned underground irrigation system that had once served a failed farming attempt in the region. Valor watched, trembling, not understanding the reason for being in this strange place, far from the spotlights and applause he was accustomed to. When the hole reached approximately 3 feet deep, Merrick made a commanding gesture. "Put him in there." There was a moment of collective hesitation, a suspended instant where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It was Jason who finally verbalized what everyone was thinking. "Sir, this isn't right. We could take him to another vet, try a treatment." "You're paid to obey, not to think," Merrick cut him off. Then, softening his voice like a predator changing tactics, he added, "Look, I'm not asking you to end him. I just want him to learn a lesson. A few hours here, rethinking his priorities. We'll be back before nightfall." The lie was transparent, but it offered the necessary comfort for the men's consciences to bend to pressure. With evident reluctance, they guided Valor into the hole. The Labrador, sensing danger, tried to resist, but his injured paw and the residual effect of the medications made his efforts futile. Once in the hole, Merrick personally supervised as the assistants pushed the viscous mud around the animal's body, leaving only the head exposed. Valor whimpered softly, his amber eyes fixed on Merrick with an expression that transcended animal understanding. A wordless question. Why? For a brief moment, something wavered in Merrick's eyes. A memory crossed his mind. Himself at 16, receiving Valor as a puppy, tears streaming down his face as his mother, already weakened by chemotherapy, smiled and said, He will be your companion when I can no longer be here. Promise me, you'll care for him with love." The moment passed. Merrick hardened his jaw and turned his back. "Theos will be back at nightfall," he repeated without looking back. "Or maybe tomorrow after he's had time to reconsider his performance." As they walked away, Jason looked back one last time. Valor remained motionless, only his eyes moving, following the group that abandoned him under the merciless sun. What none of them noticed was the small figure watching them from a distance, partially hidden by a rock formation. Nico, who had followed the SUV on his old bicycle, had witnessed the entire scene with growing horror. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold the camera, but he continued photographing, each click recording evidence of the cruelty he was witnessing. As soon as the SUV disappeared in a cloud of dust, Nico ran to Valor. The animal's condition made his stomach turn, the body trapped in viscous mud, only the head exposed to the pitiless sun, the eyes oppressed by pain and confusion. "Hang in there, buddy," he whispered, kneeling beside the animal. "I won't abandon you." He took his water bottle from his backpack and carefully offered it to Valor, who drank avidly. Next, he tore a piece of his own shirt and moistened it to clean away the flies and dried mud that were already beginning to accumulate around the Labrador's eyes. "I'll get help," he promised, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "I'll be back as quickly as possible." Mounting his bicycle, Nico pedaled like never before, his legs propelled by a mixture of adrenaline and indignation. In his mind, a single thought repeated like a mantra: "He doesn't deserve this. Nobody deserves this." Meanwhile, on the Sonoran Flats, temperatures began to drop with the approach of evening. The same desert that burned during the day now shimmered with the first cold breath of night. Valor, unable to move, trembled in silence, his gaze fixed in the direction where Nico had disappeared. An invisible thread of hope stretched across the desolate landscape. The streets of Red Bluff never seemed so long to Nico. Each pedal turn was a battle against time, against the injustice he had witnessed. When he finally arrived at the entrance to the small-town veterinary clinic, his lungs burned, and his legs trembled with exhaustion. Dr. Elias Monroe was about to close the office when the boy came tearing in, words stumbling over each other in breathless explanations and barely contained tears. "Easy, kid," said the veterinarian, placing his hands on Nico's shoulders. "Take a deep breath and tell me exactly what happened." When Nico finally managed to organize his thoughts and report what he had witnessed, a heavy silence fell over the small waiting room. Dr. Monroe's normally friendly face transformed into a mask of horror and guilt. Merrick buried Valor. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, sir," Nico replied, extending his camera. "I have photos. He's stuck in the mud with just his head out in the middle of nowhere. We need to do something." The veterinarian examined the images, his expression darkening with each click. When he finished, his shoulders fell as if carrying an invisible weight. "I should have spoken up earlier," he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. "I knew Valor was injured, a fracture in his paw, imperceptible to most, but I saw the x-rays. Merrick forced me to medicate him for the competition." His confession surprised even himself. For years he had committed to silence, protecting the Altons while ignoring his own professional ethics. The fear of losing his livelihood, of being sued, of seeing his reputation destroyed, all this had kept him in an invisible prison of complicity. "Dr. Monroe," Nico's voice brought him back. "It doesn't matter what happened before. We need to save Valor now." Something in the simplicity of those words, in the moral clarity uncontaminated by years of concessions and justifications, hit the veterinarian like lightning. He picked up his phone and began to dial. "You're right, kid. It's time to do what's right." Within minutes, a small crowd began forming at the clinic. First came Sarah, the receptionist, then Marco, the veterinary technician who was off duty. Soon Nico's parents arrived, followed by neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had heard rumors about what was happening. Initially, there was skepticism. Valor was practically a celebrity, and Merrick Alton was the prodigal son of the region's most powerful family. Who would believe the words of a 12-year-old boy against the Alton empire? But then Nico showed the photos. The evidence was undeniable, shocking in its cruelty. And something awakened in those simple residents of Red Bluff, a collective feeling that fundamental lines had been crossed, that some things were simply unacceptable, regardless of the power or money involved. "Now let's go get him," declared Maya, Nico's mother. a woman with calloused hands who had dedicated years to the animals of Silverpine Estate before being dismissed without any explanation. No living being deserves such treatment. An improvised rescue mission took shape. Trucks were started, shovels loaded, flashlights checked. Dr. Monroe prepared an emergency kit with fluids, painkillers, and basic stabilization equipment. Someone brought blankets. Another provided more water. A chain of solidarity formed before Nico's amazed eyes. When the convoy finally departed for the Sonoran Flats, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky with orange tones that seemed to reflect the urgency of the mission. Nico traveled in the cab of the truck, led by Dr. Monroe, serving as a guide through the winding and increasingly undefined roads that led to the location where Valor was. "There!" he finally shouted, pointing to a rock formation he had memorized. "It's just after that curve." When they arrived, everyone's heart tightened at the sight. Valor, still trapped in the mud now hardened by the night cold, had ceased to struggle. His head hung to the side, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. But at the sound of vehicles, his ears moved slightly, a faint sign that there was still life in that mistreated body. And then something unexpected happened. From behind a small rock, a striped cat appeared, the same one Nico had been looking for in previous days, which had mysteriously disappeared from the neighborhood. The feline cautiously approached Valor and sat beside him, as if standing guard. "Storm!" exclaimed Nico, recognizing his missing cat. The coincidence seemed almost supernatural, as if some invisible force had orchestrated this unlikely encounter in the middle of the desert. There was no time to contemplate the mystery. Everyone immediately set to work. While some began carefully digging around Valor, Dr. Monroe approached to assess the animal's condition. "He's dehydrated, in shock, and probably hypothermic," he diagnosed, connecting an intravenous fluid system. "The fracture in his paw looks worse. Must have worsened during his struggle to free himself." Upon closer examination, the veterinarian frowned, his professional indignation replacing years of submission. There's no way this animal could have competed without severe pain. Someone knew this, and deliberately ignored it. Larissa, a former journalist who now worked as manager of the local grocery store, began filming the entire scene with her cell phone. The dog's trembling body, Nico's tearful face, the coordinated efforts of Red Bluff residents to free an innocent being from unjustifiable cruelty. As the mud was removed, Valor's true condition was revealed. His once powerful body seemed fragile, diminished, but there was dignity in his gaze, a silent resistance that touched even the toughest in the group. When they finally managed to free him completely, a collective sigh of relief ran through the group. With infinite care, they transferred Valor to an improvised stretcher and carried him to Dr. Monroe's truck, where an area had already been prepared with blankets and thermal bags. "What now?" someone asked, verbalizing the question that hung in the air. Challenging the Altons was not something done lightly in Red Bluff. It was Maya, Nico's mother, who responded with striking simplicity. "Now we do what's right, we save a life, and we make sure this never happens again." As the improvised convoy returned to town, Larissa began uploading the videos to her social media. "The world needs to see this," she murmured, her fingers working quickly on the captions. "People need to know." In the back of the truck, Nico sat beside Valor, gently stroking his head while Dr. Monroe monitored his vital signs. The Labrador breathed with difficulty, but his eyes remained fixed on the boy, as if, amid chaos and pain, he had found something to anchor to. "Everything's going to be okay, buddy," whispered Nico, not just to the dog, but as a promise to himself. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Storm, Nico's cat, had been brought along and now settled close to Valor, as if continuing his unlikely vigil. The strange friendship between two normally rival species seemed to symbolize something greater that was happening that night, an unlikely alliance against cruelty, a collective refusal to remain silent. Meanwhile, a few miles away, in the luxurious Silverpine estate, Merrick Alton slowly sipped his expensive whiskey, completely oblivious to the fact that his life was about to change forever. Morning arrived in Red Bluff with unusual intensity. The small Horizon Veterinary Center, normally quiet in the early hours, buzzed with activity. Volunteers came and went carrying supplies. Local journalists clustered at the entrance, trying to capture any information about Valor's condition. On social media, Larissa's videos had spread like wildfire, reaching impressive viewing numbers overnight. Inside the main treatment room, Dr. Monroe worked tirelessly, assisted by colleagues who had responded to his emergency call. Valor had gone through a long night of procedures to stabilize his condition: intensive hydration, pain medication, care for abrasions and injuries caused by mud and sun, plus a complete assessment of the fracture. "The injury to his paw is more serious than we initially thought," the veterinarian explained to Nico and his parents, who refused to leave the site. "We'll need specialized surgery, and even then, I can't guarantee he'll walk normally again." Nico, who had slept wrapped in a blanket on the floor beside Valor's observation cage, nodded solemnly. "He doesn't need to win more competitions. He just needs to be happy." The simplicity of that statement brought a sad smile to Dr. Munro's tired face. How had they strayed so far from the fundamental purpose of veterinary medicine? How had he himself allowed fear and ambition to obscure his commitment to animal welfare? The moment of reflection was interrupted by the strident ring of his phone. The veterinarian's expression changed upon seeing the name on the display: Merrick Alton. "Doctor," the voice on the other end sounded falsely casual. "It seems we have a situation. My dog has disappeared, and curiously, I heard rumors that he was seen at your clinic." Dr. Munro took a deep breath. Years of conditioning struggling against newly discovered courage. "They're not rumors, Merrick. Valor is here. And he's receiving the medical treatment he should have received a long time ago." There was a moment of stunned silence before the response. "So, you've become a thief now. That dog is Alton property, a six-figure investment. I suggest you return him immediately, or you'll face legal consequences that will destroy not just your career, but your entire life." Something broke inside the veterinarian, the last vestige of fear that still bound him. "No, Merrick. What I'm going to face are the consequences of years of staying silent while you abused that animal. Purchase price investment? We're talking about a living being that you buried and left to die in the desert, and I have proof of that." The threat from the other end was immediate and cold. "You're making a terrible mistake. I'll be there in 20 minutes with my lawyers and security. Prepare to hand over my dog and sign a stack of confidentiality agreements if you don't want to end up under a bridge." The call abruptly ended, leaving Dr. Munro trembling but resolute. He turned to Maya and Carlos, Nico's parents. "Merrick is coming. With all the legal apparatus and intimidation money can buy." Maya exchanged a determined look with her husband before responding, "Then we'd better prepare our own reception." Within minutes, messages began circulating through Red Bluff community groups. The news that Merrick Alton was on his way to reclaim Valor, after all he had done, provoked a reaction no one could have predicted. People who rarely involved themselves in any kind of demonstration began arriving in front of the clinic. Farmers strategically parked their tractors, blocking part of the street. Residents brought folding chairs and thermoses, establishing themselves as if preparing for a long siege. When the Altons' caravan of luxury vehicles finally appeared, it was greeted by a human wall. There were no elaborate signs or organized shouts, just a silent and resolute presence of an entire community, saying without words, "Not this time." Merrick exited his SUV with the confidence of someone accustomed to bending the world to his will. Beside him, 3 men in suits carried briefcases and severe expressions, the Altons' legal artillery. Behind them, 2 burly security guards completed the intimidation tableau. The young heir froze momentarily at the sight of dozens of townspeople blocking his path. His surprise quickly turned to irritation as he spotted Dr. Munro standing at the clinic entrance, arms crossed. "This is private property and you're all trespassing," Merrick announced loudly. "And you," he pointed at the veterinarian, "are in possession of stolen property worth more than most of you will earn in a lifetime." Dr. Munro stepped forward, no longer intimidated. No one is trespassing, Merrick. These people are here voluntarily to ensure that an animal abuse victim receives proper care and protection." One of the lawyers whispered something in Merrick's ear, probably advising caution given the number of phones recording the confrontation. The young Alton forced a diplomatic smile. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. Valor is a cherished member of our family, a champion who deserves the best care. Whatever you think happened was simply a training exercise that was—" "A training exercise?" The unexpected voice came from behind the crowd as it parted to reveal Jason, the young assistant who had been with Merrick at the desert. His hands trembled, but his voice was firm. "You ordered us to bury him alive, Mr. Alton. You said, and I quote, 'I know exactly what to do with failures.'" A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Merrick's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You're fired," he hissed, "and you'll never work again in this state." Jason nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I figured as much. That's why I brought this." He held up a small digital recorder. "I record all work instructions as a personal reference. Company policy, actually, recommended by your father's HR department." For the first time in perhaps his entire life, Merrick Alton found himself speechless. The dynamics of power that had always benefited him were suddenly shifting, like desert sands in a storm. Taking advantage of the moment, Dr. Monroe stepped forward again. "Valor requires specialized treatment for injuries directly resulting from your actions, Merrick. The ethical thing to do would be to contribute to his recovery, not threaten those trying to save him." Something unexpected flickered across Merrick's expression, a momentary crack in his arrogant facade. For a brief second, those watching caught a glimpse of something deeper, confusion, fear, perhaps even shame, but just as quickly the walls came up again. "Fine," he spat. "Keep the damn dog. He's damaged goods anyway." Turning to his legal team, he added, "Let's go. This isn't worth my time." As the luxury vehicles began to pull away, Nico stepped out from the clinic doorway where he'd been watching. His voice, though young, carried clear across the suddenly silent parking lot. "He has a name, you know, and he's not a thing. He feels pain and fear and loyalty. He deserved better from you." Merrick paused, hand on his car door, struck by the simple truth from a child's mouth. For a moment that stretched like eternity, their eyes met across the distance. The privileged heir and the working-class boy, separated by wealth and status, yet connected by their love for the same animal. Without a word, Merrick slid into his vehicle and slammed the door. The convoy departed in a cloud of dust, but something fundamental had changed in Red Bluff that day. A community had found its voice, and in the clinic behind them, a broken Labrador was beginning the long journey toward healing, surrounded by people who saw him not as an investment or a trophy, but as a being worthy of compassion and care. News travels fast in small towns, but in the age of social media, it travels at light speed across the country. By evening, the story of Valor, the show dog buried alive by his wealthy owner and rescued by a small community, had reached national media outlets. Hashtags trended. Celebrity animal rights advocates shared Larissa's videos. Donations poured into the hastily created Valor Recovery Fund to cover mounting medical expenses. Inside the clinic, transformed now into a makeshift intensive care unit, the atmosphere was a curious blend of determination and cautious hope. Dr. Monroe had called in specialists from the nearest veterinary teaching hospital, who arrived with equipment the small clinic had never seen before. Valor underwent his first surgery to repair the complex fracture in his front leg, a procedure that took hours and required specialized pins and plates. "The good news," explained Dr. Sophia Chen, the orthopedic specialist, as she showed x-rays to the anxious group waiting outside the recovery room, "is that we've stabilized the fracture. The bad news is the extensive muscle and tissue damage from prolonged stress on the injury." He was clearly competing while severely injured for quite some time. Nico, who had refused to go home despite his parents' gentle insistence, asked the question everyone feared. "Will he walk again?" Dr. Chen's kind eyes settled on the boy. "I believe he will, but it won't be easy. He'll need extensive rehabilitation, possibly additional surgeries and patience, lots of patience." "We have time," Nico said simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." True to his word, the boy established a routine that amazed even the medical professionals. Every morning before school, he arrived to sit with Valor, reading aloud from his science textbooks or simply talking about his day ahead. Every afternoon he returned, often completing homework on the floor beside the recovering Labrador. What surprised the staff most was how Valor responded. His vital signs stabilized when Nico was present, his eyes tracking the boy's movements, his tail occasionally offering a weak thump against the blankets. "It's like there's a frequency only they share," observed Nurse Patty, the overnight supervisor. "Something deeper than words." Storm, Nico's cat, had become an unexpected therapy companion, often curling up near Valor's bed during visiting hours. The unusual friendship between cat and dog became another element of the story that captivated public imagination as updates were shared online. Meanwhile, in the polished marble halls of Silver Pine Estate, Merrick Alton was experiencing something entirely new: consequences. The viral videos had reached major sponsors and investors, who immediately distanced themselves from the Alton heir. His social media, once a shrine to perfection and privilege, became a battlefield of outrage and criticism. PR firms refused to represent him. Former friends claimed they'd always seen troubling signs. For the first time in his life, Merrick found himself alone with his thoughts, without the buffer of wealth to shield him from reality. Sitting in his cavernous home office, he stared at the wall of trophies and ribbons that valor had won, symbols that had once defined his worth, but now seemed as hollow as he felt. The sound of the heavy office door opening broke his reverie. Frederick Alton, his father, entered with the commanding presence that had intimidated boardrooms and political figures for decades. The Alton patriarch rarely involved himself in his son's affairs, preferring to manage the empire and leave the fat of frivolities to his heir. "Quite a mess you've made," Frederick observed, his voice carrying neither anger nor sympathy, merely clinical assessment. Merrick straightened defensively. "The media is blowing it out of proportion. In a week, they'll move on to—" "Stop." The single word, quietly delivered, silenced Merrick instantly. "Try for once in your life, face reality without spinning it. I've seen the videos, I've heard the recordings. You buried your mother's last gift to you in mud and left him to die because he failed to perform as expected." The brutal summary hung in the air between them. "I've spent my life building an empire," Frederick continued, walking to the window that overlooked the estate's manicured grounds. "An empire I thought would be your foundation. Instead, it became your weapon. That's my failure, not yours." Merrick stared at his father, struggling to process this unprecedented conversation. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that it's time for consequences and change, real change." Frederick turned, his expression unreadable. "The board of directors met this morning. You've been removed from all company positions and accounts pending completion of comprehensive psychological evaluation and treatment." "You can't do that." Merrick stood, panic rising. "I'm your son, your heir." "Yes, you are my son," Frederick agreed, a flicker of genuine pain crossing his features. "Which is why I should have done this years ago, when your mother first expressed concerns about your intensity, your obsession with perfection, your inability to accept anything less than total victory." He placed a heavy envelope on the desk. "These are the details of the arrangement. You'll retain basic living expenses. The rest of your access is suspended. I've arranged for you to begin treatment next week with Dr. Levinson." "A psychiatrist? You think I'm crazy?" Merrick's voice rose incredulously. Frederick shook his head slowly. "I think you're broken. As your father, I should have seen it sooner. The signs were there. The way you discarded anything that disappointed you. The impossible standards, the rage when things weren't perfect." He paused. "You've buried more than just valor in the desert over the years, haven't you?" Merrick's silence was confirmation enough. "I thought so." Frederick moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. I've made a decision about Silverpine." "What about it?" "I'm converting a significant portion of the estate into an animal rehabilitation sanctuary, specializing in show animals discarded due to injury or age. The governing board will include that veterinarian, Monroe, and the boy's parents." Merrick stared in disbelief. "You're giving our land to those nobodies?" Frederick's expression hardened. "Those nobodies showed more humanity and courage than generations of our family have. They deserve it." He opened the door. "Your treatment begins Monday. Your driver will take you. I suggest you use this weekend to reflect on who you want to be moving forward." As the door closed behind his father, Merrick collapsed back into his chair, the familiar world crumbling around him. For the first time since he could remember, the path ahead wasn't paved with privilege and expectation. And in that uncertainty, terrifying as it was, lay the first seed of potential liberation. Spring came to Red Bluff, transforming the harsh landscape with unexpected bursts of wildflowers and renewed energy. 3 months had passed since the night of Valor's rescue, and changes blossomed throughout the community like the desert after rain. The Horizon Veterinary Center had expanded, thanks to donations and grants that poured in as Valor's story touched hearts nationwide. A new rehabilitation wing now stood where once there had been only a small parking lot. Inside, animals with various injuries received specialized care using equipment that Dr. Monroe had once only dreamed of accessing. At the center of this transformation was Valor himself. The Labrador's recovery had been neither quick nor easy. There had been setbacks, infections that delayed healing, moments when pain management proved challenging, nights when the veterinary team feared the worst. But through it all, two constants remained: Valor's resilience and Nico's unwavering presence. Today marked a special milestone. After 3 surgeries and countless therapy sessions, Valor would attempt his first supported walk outside. A small crowd had gathered in the clinic's newly landscaped garden area, staff who had been part of his care team, community members who had participated in his rescue, and journalists still following what had become known as the Valor effect. Maya adjusted her son's collar nervously. "Remember, honey, it's okay if he only takes a few steps. This is just the beginning." Nico nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. In the month since the rescue, the boy had devoured every book on animal rehabilitation he could find. He'd observed therapy sessions, asked endless questions of the specialists, and developed what Dr. Chen called an intuitive understanding of animal psychology that can't be taught. The door to the clinic opened, and Dr. Munro emerged, leading Valor on a specialized harness that provided support while allowing movement. The Labrador's once gleaming coat had grown back unevenly where it had been shaved for surgeries, giving him a patchwork appearance. His right front leg bore a visible scar, and he moved with obvious caution. But his eyes, those expressive amber eyes, were alert and focused, immediately finding Nico in the crowd. A collective breath was held as Dr. Munro carefully transferred the support harness to Nico. The boy took it with practiced hands, whispering something in Valor's ear that no one else could hear. "Whenever you're ready," Dr. Munro said softly, stepping back. Nico took a deep breath. "Come on, buddy," just like we practiced inside. One step at a time. For a heart-stopping moment, Valor simply stood, seemingly uncertain. Then, with deliberate care, he moved his right paw forward, the injured one, placing it gently on the ground. A tentative weight shift. A pause. Then the left paw. Another pause. Step by agonizing step, Valor walked the short pathway, his gait uneven but undeniably determined. Nico moved alongside him, the harness loose in his hands, there for support but barely needed. When they reached the small bench at the path's end, Valor looked up at Nico as if to ask, "Did I do okay?" The boy dropped to his knees, carefully embracing the dog while avoiding his still sensitive areas. "You did amazing," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I knew you could do it." The small crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Dr. Munro wiped away an unashamed tear. Even hardened journalists found themselves swallowing hard against unexpected emotion. "That's a fighter right there," declared Carlos, Nico's father, his voice carrying the pride that extended beyond his son to the animal they had all come to cherish. As the celebration continued around them, Nico remained beside Valor on the grass, the dog's head resting contentedly on his lap. Storm, who had been watching from a nearby planter, sauntered over to join them, settling into the small space between boy and dog with feline confidence. "Quite the unlikely family they've become," observed Larissa, now working as the social media coordinator for what had been formally established as the Valor Foundation. Dr. Munro nodded. "Sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in adversity." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar black sedan. The driver opened the rear door, and a figure emerged that caused a ripple of tension through the gathering. Merrick Alton stood uncertainly at the garden's edge, almost unrecognizable from the arrogant young heir who had once commanded attention with his mere presence. Gone were the designer clothes, replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt. His previously perfect hair was shorter, less styled, but the most striking change was in his expression. The hardness had softened, the artificial charm replaced by genuine nervousness. Dr. Munro moved first, approaching him with cautious professionalism. "Mr. Alton, this is unexpected." "I called ahead," Merrick explained quietly. "Spoke to your receptionist. I wanted to come on a day when something positive was happening. Not to disrupt, just to see." His voice trailed off as his eyes found Valor and Nico on the grass. The boy had instinctively placed a protective arm around the Labrador, who had tensed at the familiar scent of his former owner. Merrick swallowed visibly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I've been in treatment, intensive therapy. Part of my recovery is making amends where possible. Not expecting forgiveness, just acknowledging the harm I've caused." Dr. Munro studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Wait here." He crossed to where Nico sat with Valor, and crouched down to speak softly. The boy's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, wariness, uncertainty, and finally a wisdom beyond his years. After a brief conversation, Nico whispered something to Valor, gently stroking his head. To everyone's surprise, the boy beckoned Merrick over. Moving with hesitant steps, Merrick approached and then, following Nico's gesture, knelt on the grass a few feet away from them. The distance was respectful, non-threatening. "He's looking good," Merrick said softly, his eyes taking in Valor's healing form. "Better than I deserve to hope for." Nico's voice was steady. "Dr. Chen says he'll always have a limp, and he gets tired easily, but he's getting stronger every day." Merrick nodded, emotion visibly constricting his throat. "I don't expect forgiveness," he finally managed, "from any of you, especially not from him." He looked directly at Valor for the first time. "But I needed you to know. I regret it. Every second of it." The Labrador watched him with inscrutable eyes, neither advancing nor retreating, not offering affection but not showing fear either. A neutral acknowledgement that registered Merrick's presence without judgment. "Dr. Monroe says you're helping fund the sanctuary at Silverpine," Nico said, breaking the tense silence. Merrick nodded. "It's the least I could do. My father made the decision, but I've supported it, been working with the planners when they let me." He paused. "Your parents are doing an amazing job overseeing it." "They know animals," Nico said simply. "They always have." A moment of awkward silence followed, broken unexpectedly by Storm. The cat stretched, yawned dramatically, and then did something extraordinary. He walked over to Merrick, sniffed his hand cautiously, and then head-butted it once before retreating to his spot beside Valor. The small gesture, insignificant as it might seem, shifted something in the atmosphere. Not forgiveness perhaps, but acknowledgement. Recognition of change, however incomplete. "Second chances are possible," Nico said quietly, his eyes on Valor. "That's what my mom says. Not guaranteed. You have to earn them, but they're possible." Merrick's eyes glistened. I'd like to believe that." For a brief moment, the four of them, boy, dog, cat, and the man seeking redemption, existed in a fragile bubble of possibility, each changed irrevocably by their intersection in time and circumstance, each still writing their ongoing story. The moment was broken by Dr. Chen calling everyone's attention for a small ceremony, marking Valor's milestone. Merrick rose, understanding that his time here was appropriately limited. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me see him, for everything you've done." As he turned to leave, Nico's voice stopped him. "There's an open house at Silverpine next month. When the first phase of the sanctuary opens, you should come." Merrick turned back, genuine surprise on his face. "Are you sure?" Nico looked down at Valor, who had closed his eyes contentedly in the sun, then back at Merrick. "I think it's important for people to see the whole story, the bad parts and the good parts, how things can change." Nodding in silent agreement, Merrick departed as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind a complex legacy of harm, but also perhaps the first tentative steps toward healing, for himself and for those his actions had affected. Later that evening, as the excitement of the day settled into peaceful exhaustion, Nico sat on the porch of his family's modest home. Valor rested beside him, having been granted permission to spend his first night away from the clinic. Storm completed their trio, maintaining his self-appointed position as feline guardian. From this vantage point, they could just make out the distant outline of Silverpine Estate against the twilight sky. Once a symbol of untouchable wealth and exclusion, it was now being transformed, not erased, but repurposed. Old gardens became natural habitats, tennis courts converted to rehabilitation spaces, swimming pools redesigned for water therapy. "You know what, Valor?" Nico said softly, scratching behind the Labrador's ears. "Sometimes the worst days lead to the best changes." Valor sighed contentedly, leaning against the boy who had become his unlikely savior and truest friend. His journey was far from complete. There would be more therapy, more challenges, more adjustments to his new reality. But for the first time since that fateful competition day, his eyes held something that had been missing for too long: peace. As darkness fell over Red Bluff, stars appeared in the desert sky with remarkable clarity. On the porch, a boy, a dog, and a cat watched them emerge, each a survivor in their own way, each forever changed by the unbreakable bonds forged in both tragedy and triumph. In the distance, A wooden sign was being installed at what would soon become the entrance to Silverpine Sanctuary. Its simple message would greet visitors and serve as a reminder of the journey that had brought them all to this point. Sometimes we have to lose everything to finally find what truly matters. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.